Hello and welcome to this edition of Going Public. I'm your host, Keith Weissite. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We always like to get updates, especially when it comes to how and what our future looks like. One of the people that's going to help us do that, Dwayne Bourgeois, over with the Executive Director of the North Lafourche Levee District. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. You know, a lot of people are talking about this FEMA's Risk Rating 2.0 and what it means. And so can we just talk a little bit about and get an update on what that means for us and the flood ratings?
Sure, and with good reason we're talking about it, because it is going to be a very impactful programmatic change to the flood insurance program that's sneaking in on us. And what it basically amounts to is Risk Rating 2.0 is a revision in the way that FEMA does the rating for flood insurance policies for those communities that are in the National Flood Insurance Program. So Lafourche, Terrebonne, all of the communities in Louisiana, 22,500 communities across the nation participated in the flood insurance program.
Right.
And historically, what we were looking at was the ability to have our rates set as a function of the mapping that was provided by FEMA. So FEMA provided flood insurance rate maps, firms, or digital flood insurance, D-firms as we hear them now, that basically sets a base flood elevation, and the community then adopts those maps for floodplain management, requiring people to build above that base flood elevation. And as long as you were above that base flood elevation, the premise was basically that FEMA will have mitigated the risk of paying a claim to you for up to the 100-year flood and our 1% annual exceedance probability. I don't like the term 100 years, but
Right.
in essence, that was the process. So you just built above that base flood. Well, they've totally disconnected, not 100%, but 99% disconnected the rates of flood insurance from those flood maps, to where the flood maps are pretty much only used to determine whether you're in or not in a special flood hazard area, which would mean you would have a requirement for purchase if you had a loan that was in any way backed by the government through the FDIC or anything like that. So
Right.
it's a very big, bold change that they feel Congress asked them to do, and it's being implemented right now. For new policies, it was begun in October of last year. For renewals, so anybody who's getting their renewals right now will see their rates increase. Typically, some will go down, but in Lafourche and Terrebonne, the majority of our policies are going up. I think nationally it's average of 73% are seeing an increase, states seeing 80%, and Lafourche and Terrebonne, unfortunately, 96 and I think 95% in Terrebonne are seeing increases in their rates based off of Risk Rating 2.0, those people who are have policies.
Right, and so it's kind of just a new way of determining, just a new way of looking at where the risk is.
Right, and the problem with it is we're unable to determine how they made those determinations, right?
Right.
So
what data did you use?
well, exactly,
to compare
and
that, right?
we've been trying to dive into it further and further. Again, when you disconnect it from the rates, what subdivision developers are finding out is, if it's, disconnected from the maps, when subdivision developers are finding out is, we can't just build higher to be safer, which is what we've historically done for years.
Right.
Now, FEMA uses some different modeling, and we've not been able to get our head around what they're doing, and we've been pushing hard on it and trying to get some information, but you can see that, even though you're 1 or 2 or 3 feet above base flood elevation, you're still potentially looking at a very large increase in the rate ultimately, because what FEMA perceives as your distance from a flood source. And I say ultimately because I think that's an important part of what's going on here. A lot of people are, hearing that we're having these increases. They get their flood insurance bill, they pay it, it's maybe going up 18%, which is the maximum allowed by law for it to increase in any given year. But if you look at the declaration page, you can see what your ultimate rate would be. Okay, you'll see on that declaration page your full risk rate as FEMA has projected it, and then you'll see a federal discounted rate, which is everything but an 18% increase. So this year, a lot of people have seen it. It went from 500 to 7 something, and well, it's not good, but everything's going up crazy this year. But they really got to look at the rest of that declaration page to see what they're ultimately going to be going towards. And it's, in a lot of cases, not very good at all.
Well, and a lot of times when we find these kinds of situations, we see some kind of ramp up for that, where they'll go up a percentage each year, or they'll go up a little bit up to that 18%. But this seems like a kind of a big whammy at one time.
Right, and 18%, a lot of people are hanging their hat on the fact that, well, it's 18% a year. And look, it does buy us a little bit time to try to really push back hard and potentially, what we were looking for before they actually implemented risk rating 2.0 was, well, what are we talking about? What kind of rates are we talking about?
Right.
So now they put the cart before the horse. They put the rates out and, started enforcing
Collecting
those
those,
rates. Right, while we're still trying to figure out if they got this right or even close. And so 18% sounds like, okay, well, I can probably handle that. But, in 3 years, in 4 years, it's nearly doubled. Whatever you were paying is nearly doubled. In 7 years, it's quadrupled. It's tripled. In 9 years, it's quadrupled. And in 10th year, it's probably 5 times the amount you were paying or higher.
Wow.
And that makes it very difficult, right?
Sure.
I mean, for some. And so we're on this 18% glide path to a maximum rate, which they're now revealing after you pay your bill, when you get the deck page, what that maximum rate will be. And, we're seeing homes that currently, are paying, we're paying $570, $600 a year, who are looking to go to $6,300, $7,000 a year. And that's not doable. You can't sustain a $500 a month flood insurance bill. And so we're counting on this 18% to at least buy us some time to do some things. And maybe the fact that they finally showed their cards on what the rates will be will give us some incentive nationally, because nationally this program, the changes to this program in risk rating 2.0 adversely affect Louisiana much more disproportionately than anywhere else.
Is that simply because of so much coastline, or is that because of so much water or proximity to water?
Well, it's in our case, I think it's several different things. It is the coastline, the proximity to water, which is a big deal in this rating system. But what's kind of interesting is that you hear across the nation so many times people saying that, well, the cost of flood insurance should reflect the risk, be reflected in the risk, or the risk that should be reflected in the cost.
Right.
And that's the case. When you say it fast, it sounds good, but the nation lives along the water, and historically, we've lived, since antiquity, we've lived along the water because there's a reason. In our nation, 50% of the nation's GDP is produced in the coastal zones of the eastern seaboard, western seaboard, and the Gulf of Mexico. If you add the inland waterways and Great Lakes, you're talking about the lion's share of the nation's GDP is produced in these coastal zones. And now we're getting these signals where they're trying to price us away from where we have to live to produce that lion's share of GDP. And so it's a bit putting again, the cart before the horse. It's backwards. Yeah. We can address the risk. We should know the risk,
right,
and we should mitigate the risk through other programs, which are like building levees and
right,
elevating homes and things of that nature that allow us to live where we need to live, so that we can produce that GDP. You don't do that on beach homes. It's not what, but it's what the perception is, right, for all of the inland states and the people who have much lower numbers of flood insurance policies in their state.
Yeah, and I know we're probably going to end up taking a break before we finish discussing this, but how does that affect the housing market?
Well, it can't do anything good for the housing market, obviously. I say that, the renewal, the deck page shows now a house is going to be $6,300 a year. Okay, that's $500 a month for flood insurance. So that person can maintain that 18% increase for a while, and you could sell the house, and that person could maintain the 18% increase. But will they? Would someone buy a house that there's no guarantee that they won't be able to afford in the future? So it obviously will have a big impact on home insurance, on home values. It's having a big impact today on where people are living and choosing to live, and I think that's their intended consequence. But it's again backwards. It's causing people to lose value of property that they planned on retiring on, for example, or planned on building a house on, and it's just everything's upside down with it.
Yeah, and so ironically enough, I know nobody's surprised that sometimes the government makes decisions where they put the cart before the horse, and the decision's made before there's any explanation. And then we have the impact, the deck page, and then we look at it and see what happens. We're talking a little bit about how this is affecting homes and how it's going to affect them over the years and how they're using this mapping system. But is there anybody who's kind of fighting for us, anybody legislatively who's really kind of taking this on to kind of bear the burden to share what the people are feeling?
Yeah, I think nationally, this, again, disproportionately impacts us because the topography, our proximity to water, the Mississippi River, everything that is what makes us what we are, is being challenged by this program because of the way they're trying to implement it. So we've got legislatively, all of our delegation is acutely aware of it and it is pushing back at every opportunity. But again, we're the outliers, right? Mm-hmm. We're not positioned specifically to be able to make broad changes, although lots of legislation has been pushed. So the movements that have happened on the Senate side, we've had questions posed by Senator Kennedy and Senator Cassidy have asked questions in response to hearings, but we're just not getting a lot of answers. I think that FEMA thinks they're doing a good thing, the right thing. I think they're doing what Congress has asked them to do to make this an actuarially rated program, or actually rated insurance. But what gets lost is the fact that it's actually a program, and as a program, it's not been all that bad, right? It's FEMA has indicated that they've taken in $60 billion in premiums over the 50-year life, but it's cost them $96 billion to operate the program, and that's paying claims, paying insurance companies who sell the product, paying their mapping partners and their general overhead. So $36 billion over 50 years as a program. Well, I don't know how that bears up against a lot of other things, but I'd say it's not horrible.
Right.
But when you consider it as a program, FEMA also says that the things that Lafourche and Terrebonne and the 22,500 communities across the nation have done in adopting floodplain management standards based off the mapping that was given to us has, by FEMA's estimate, saved the nation $100 billion in the last 40 years alone. So if it cost 36 and yet saved $100 billion, why do we need these draconian increase in the rates, right? You don't need to go actuarial, and that was the whole purpose of the program. But frankly, if we're going to go actuarial on this, then we don't need the federal government at all. We could turn it over to the private sector, who could probably do a much better job of an actuarially priced thing. But
and typically do.
We were there.
Right.
We were there before 1965 when Betsy came, and a whole bunch of flood insurance companies that were offering, private sector that were offering flood insurance went under because they had so much correlated risk. And so the idea was to spread the program across the country so that you could do it. And as a program, I think it's been successful.
Right. And mitigate the risk, right?
Correct. I think Congress has taken us in the wrong direction. And we've got a little bit of the onion peeled back on how this has been done. Locally, we've had some very specific conversations with the mapping partners. So Lafourche and Terrebonne for over a decade now have been working on getting our revised and updated maps through a process called LAMP, which is a levy analysis mapping procedure. they still don't have the final maps, okay? And we're meeting with that group in FEMA to start to figure out what's what and explain to them, look, largely what you do is irrelevant now with regards to the price, but this special flood hazard area, you got to get this right. And so we flew up to Region 6 and had discussions about that. But we've also had some discussions with FEMA's actuarial guys. Andy Neal is a guy I've been knowing for years, and I think it's a situation where they're not recognizing our unique geography in a lot of ways, right? So we're a distributary system of the Mississippi River. Everywhere upriver, you have what's called a natural valley, right? So the valley leads to the water source, which is at the bottom of the valley. The obvious answer is move away from the water source, and you therefore get onto the higher land. In our case, the water source, if you will, which is regulated in all of the bayous here, is the high ground. And
That's
moving
right.
away from the water source is a counterproductive argument, and it's telling people to do things that we don't want them to do.
Right.
But it's also messing up how FEMA tries to calculate our risk. It's because, okay, you're close to the water, so you're at a high risk. No, that water has not flowed since 1903.
Right.
Okay.
And we're controlling that water
and we're
now
trying to
with
get
our
those
ability, with our
points
levee
across.
system.
Correct. Yeah.
To help them understand. So what do we do to work around this? What's our workaround?
Well,
or is there any?
our hopes are is that we can continue to draw attention to it and work with it. The folks at FEMA that we were talking to, mapping wise, said yes. Well, we get our data from the National Levee Database, which is produced by the Corps of Engineers, and your levees were all in there. Talking about North Lafourche levee districts. Yeah, they're in there, but they're only a line on the map. There's a line, there's a name, and a number. There's no data on its elevation, its cross-section, whatever. And they said, well, okay.
It's productivity and
it's
preventing
just listed.
water.
It's
right?
just listed, right?
It can't be just a line item.
Well, it needs to show the elevation, the cross-sections, and all of its ability to prevent water from moving into an area, which largely they do. And they said, well, in that case, then we use LIDAR to determine where your levees are, and that's an imaging system that gets ground elevation. But, you can have a levee, in our case, that's, 30 feet wide. It'll only have 2 dots on the LIDAR hitting it because the LIDAR grid is 3 meters, right? So you're not going to get the resolution you need. You could have a flood wall that's 28 feet high that could completely stop water, but you won't see it on LIDAR. So they don't have what they don't have, and they don't know what they don't know. Right. And that's our case. More recently, and you mentioned it before, we were talking, the governor, along with Archie Chasson, Lafourche Parish, and Darren Guidry, replacing Gardy, who's out of country. Gardy Dove, Parish President Gardy Dove, met with Secretary Mayorkas, and we brought up a lot of these points. I don't think he's going to stop the program right now, but he did pay attention, and he was listening to this. And so he's head of Department of Homeland Security. That's over FEMA.
Right.
And I just think that we just got to keep the pushback, keep pushing back, prove them technically wrong, prove that there's no reason for this house that's never flooded in its 50-year existence to all of a sudden see $6,300.
Five times rate increase over that 9-year period, as you mentioned. So what do people do? What do they do if they're very disappointed and want to be able to talk to someone about their increase in flood insurance?
Well, I think getting that data is helpful because we're like I said, Secretary asked us to give them some crisp, clear examples.
Give us some hard numbers, right?
We can get that data back from a lot of people. It doesn't show up until you have your declaration page. So that's one thing. Number two is, as tough as it may be right now, trying to work on this, I would suggest you not drop your flood insurance, right? Even if you can, because it's going to put you in a position where the new person's immediately going to see a maximum flood insurance if you tried to sell your house. So it's going to be a personal decision. Everybody's going to have to make it. And FEMA has estimated that because of risk rating 2.0, they would see a drop of about 20% of the policies in the program, and that's a horrible thing. It
Sure.
tells you that they should not have gone and launched this thing without a lot more public interaction and interface. That's 1 million policyholders, leaving the 5 million policyholders that are in this program nationally.
Wow.
And to date, since October, they've lost half of those. So I don't know that million is an accurate number, because they were predicting 1 million over 10 years. And now they've lost 450,000 since October.
Just since October.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a person that lives in a place.
That's 500,000 in 10 months.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right.
So,
Right. So some final thoughts. Now we have about a minute and a half left about risk rating 2.0 and/or the impact to our people.
yeah, well, our delegation is trying. They're just not well positioned. Locally, we're trying. Locally, we've got Greater New Orleans Inc. is really heavily pushing on this and trying to do things. We work with the Fort Bend Flood Authority very closely, and some other folks that are really tracking this. Through the Association of Levee Boards of Louisiana, we're really on top of this issue, and working with CPRA and the DOTD at the state level. The governor obviously pushed pretty hard on Secretary Mayorkas before Darren and Archie got to him.
Involved, right.
So he's on top of this. We're trying to get them to understand that there are huge implications, and in spite of maybe what is a good intention to do risk, is you should address the affordability and ways to mitigate the risk before you just start dumping that cost on top of the homeowners.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time, your knowledge about this subject, and what y'all are doing to fight for it.
Thanks.
So thank you for your time today. We really appreciate
Thanks for
it.
having us.
Absolutely. And again, that's Dwayne Bourgeois, who is the Executive Director of the North Lafourche Levee District, talking about this risk rating 2.0. Hope you've enjoyed that here for Going Public. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, a whole lot more local programming here on HTV.